We begin, though, with a mystery and a question. 3 days into this, amid that breaking news and other action, why have we heard so little from the man at the center of it, the president? Because with an emergency, there's usually at least some sense of urgency, and there's not a lot of that coming from the White House. Or more to the point, from Mar-a-Lago, where the president spent the weekend and had an omelet or two. Now, there's no denying a lot's been happening since he signed the order on Friday diverting military money for wall construction. What's missing, though, is much of anything from the president himself. He said nothing about it at a rally today in South Florida before heading back to Washington. In fact, he's had little to say on the subject all weekend from Mar-a-Lago, and we've seen no evidence he's done anything either. Now, in fairness, there may be little to do until the Pentagon determines how the money can be moved around. But apart from a briefing he got on this on Friday, there's no indication from the White House that he's had any substantive briefings, meetings, or calls on this so-called emergency since then, which is odd given the picture that he painted on Friday.
We're talking about an invasion of our country with drugs, with human traffickers, with all types of criminals and gangs. I said, listen, we have tremendous amounts of fentanyl coming into our country, kills tens of thousands of people. I think far more than anybody registers. You can't take human traffic, women and girls. You can't take them through ports of entry. You can't have them tied up in the back seat of a car or a truck or a van. They open the door, they look. They can't see 3 women with tape in their mouth or 3 women whose hands are tied.
A dire situation demanding emergency action, he said, before heading to Florida. Still, an all-caps crisis the following night. Building the wall, he tweeted Saturday evening. But by Sunday morning, he seemed to lose interest, reserving his caps lock key for other things. The rigged and corrupt media is the enemy of the people, he shouted on Twitter. Also this, nothing funny about Tired Saturday Night Live on fake news NBC. Question is, how do the networks get away with these total Republican hit jobs without retribution? Likewise for many other shows. Very unfair and should be looked into. This is the real collusion. By this morning, he was tweeting out praise for Fox News. Great analysis by Fox and Friends. He also tweeted or retweeted about Andrew McCabe's allegations on 60 Minutes, California's high-speed rail project, his new attorney general, poll numbers. Nothing about this emergency. He did, however, go and play golf. And as you can see, he enjoyed an omelet from his club. Now, sure, presidents deserve a little R&R and omelets, and sure, presidents can do many things at once. It goes with the job. The issue is that this president seems to be doing and saying little or nothing about something he himself made an emergency priority worth a constitutional showdown over just days before. Now, perhaps it shouldn't be surprising when you consider how little he actually focused on this emergency, even while declaring it. He spent 5 minutes boasting of other accomplishments before actually making the emergency declaration. And he quickly moved on from there to other subjects, mainly to do with himself, including the Nobel Prize that he thinks he deserves.
So Prime Minister Abiy gave me, it's the most beautiful 5-page letter. Nobel Prize, he sent it to them. You know why? Because he had rocket ships and he had missiles flying over Japan. And they had alarms going off, you know that. Now all of a sudden they feel good, they feel safe. I did that.
Again, as I mentioned, we've heard little from the White House about what, if anything, the president has been doing with respect to this national emergency that he's called, not for lack of trying. Abby Phillip joins us now with what she's been hearing from her sources. Abby, what has the president been doing with respect to the national emergency? Because you would think the last thing he would do right after declaring a national emergency is go to Mar-a-Lago to play golf.
That's right, Anderson. The sense of urgency that seemed to be there leading up to Friday's announcement has somehow disappeared. We've gotten no updates from the White House about what President Trump has been doing to respond to this national emergency that he declared on Friday. It is, of course, a holiday weekend, and many White House aides were with the president over the weekend, but there's no indication that there has been an effort to kind of keep this drumbeat going. And that's kind of interesting considering how often President Trump tweeted and commented at nearly every public public event in the last several weeks about the situation at the border. Instead, he's been preoccupied by what's been going on or what had been going on over at his Justice Department and, of course, with the Mueller probe. Now, one of the problems for the White House is that there's still a lot of real work to be done to identify where all of this money is coming from, and that work could be very tricky. Some of these projects that the White House has to take money from could be very popular among members of Congress or controversial. Already, the Pentagon has said that they are not touching certain pots of money. For example, the money that might have been devoted to military family housing. But as for other details, there has been radio silence from the White House. And of course, as you mentioned, there is the real prospect of lawsuits, the latest coming just today. And so the White House is facing not only a potential political problem as they try to identify these sources of money, but some very serious legal issues as well. What we have heard over the weekend, however, is that the White House is not ruling out President Trump using his very first veto of his presidency to defend his executive order. Whether it'll come to that, we don't exactly know yet. But so far, President Trump has been uncharacteristically quiet about this national emergency. We'll see if that changes once he gets back to Washington tonight.
Do we know what he plans to do with respect to the emergency, say, tomorrow or the next day? Is there anything on the schedule?
Nothing that we know of, Anderson, and this is clearly something that the president has said is an urgent priority. But we've seen this before in the past. When President Trump is beating the drumbeat of a crisis at the border, he does it usually leading up to some major event, like, for example, the midterm elections. And then shortly after that event occurs, there is nothing. So I wouldn't be surprised to see the president really laying low on this until at least we have some more details about where exactly all of this money is coming from, Anderson.
All right, Abby Phillip, thanks very much. Just moments ago, the legal challenges grew. 15 states have joined with California to sue to stop the national emergency. That's in addition to legal action Friday night and over the weekend from a number of public advocacy groups. Joining us now is Javier Becerra, California's Attorney General. Attorney General, thanks so much for being with us. You just filed your suit. What happens now?
Well, hopefully Congress acts and preempts the need for a lawsuit, but if it doesn't, we're ready to go.
Can you explain on what grounds you're challenging the president's emergency declaration?
Well, it's pretty clear that the president is trying to usurp Congress's authority. The president does not have the power of the purse. President can't decide to shuffle money around once Congress has allocated it. That's only for Congress to do. Otherwise, presidents for the last 240 years would have been doing the same thing when they don't like where Congress puts the money. Simply because Donald Trump fabricated a crisis and called it a national emergency doesn't mean that he can violate the separation of powers under the Constitution.
As we said earlier, there are 15 states have now joined California in the suit. Do you expect more states to join as well?
I suspect so, and I wouldn't be surprised if some states file on their own, because I think everyone is concerned when you hear that $8 billion of money that you were expecting to come for other important programs is now going to be raided by the president to pay for a border wall, which Congress specifically decided not to fund at the level the president wants. I think every state should be worried.
I want to play something that Senator Lindsey Graham said yesterday about where the president could get some of the money for the wall. Let's listen.
Let's just say for a moment that he took some money out of the military construction budget. I would say it's better for the middle school kids in Kentucky to have a secure border. We'll get them the school they need, but right now we got a national emergency on our hands.
I'm wondering, do you agree with Senator Graham's justification there?
I don't think I understand what Senator Graham is talking about. The kids in Kentucky who aren't getting as good an education as they might otherwise are going to suffer for a long time because Donald Trump's going to spend years and tens of billions of dollars, not just $8 billion, trying to build a border wall. And so I'm not sure I could not only not agree with Senator Graham, but I don't think I understand what Senator Graham's talking about.
Just last time, there is a likelihood this will end up in front of the Supreme Court. Given the court's current makeup, 5 conservative justices, 2 of which President Trump appointed, how confident are you that you would prevail in the end? Because there's kind of, this is not a conservative argument that the president is necessarily making.
Yeah, and Anderson, if you think about it, if you play this out, you would think the 5 conservative justices on the Supreme Court would want to prevent any president, not just Donald Trump, but any president, from trying to violate the Constitution. If you're a strict constructionist and you believe that the words of the Constitution should be read literally, and if Article 1 of the Constitution says the power of the purse, the ability to appropriate money, belongs to the Congress, not to the executive, how can any conservative justice side with Donald Trump?
Mr. Attorney General, I appreciate your time. We'll continue to follow it. I just want to put up on the screen the 16 states that have filed suit today. There they all are.